Welcome back to another deep dive into the chilling corridors of true crime, where fear, betrayal, and justice collide. Today, we will unravel 3 haunting tales that pushed forensic science to its limits and left communities scarred forever. Before we dive in, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe only if you truly enjoy exploring these stories with me, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is on your clock. It's always amazing to see our community connecting across the world. Now settle in, dim the lights, and let's unravel tonight's haunting journey together. Case file number 1, the Southside Strangler. Debbie Ann Dudley Davis came into this world on July 15, 1952, in Lynchburg, Virginia. She was a bright, lively young woman whose life, at first glance, seemed ordinary. After finishing school, she married young, but the marriage was short-lived, ending in divorce. Looking for a fresh start, Debbie followed her cousin Judy Fisk to Richmond, Virginia. She found a home in a cozy apartment on Devonshire Street in the peaceful Westover Hills neighborhood. By 1985, Debbie had carved out a life she enjoyed. She worked as the accounts manager for Style Weekly, a popular Richmond-based media outlet. Debbie was a pop culture enthusiast, a woman who loved Bruce Springsteen records, devoured mystery novels, and even made a cameo as an extra in the HBO movie Finnegan Begin Again to supplement her income and indulge her passion for books. She also worked a few nights a week at the Walden Bookstore inside Cloverleaf Mall, a favorite spot for the community. A night that changed everything. Friday evening, September 18th, 1987. Debbie and her friend and co-worker, Deanna Hoof, decided to take a little road trip to Virginia Beach. The plan? To laugh the night away at a Dana Carvey comedy show. Afterward, Deanna drove Debbie back to her apartment. Out of caution and friendship, she waited in her car until Debbie was safely inside before driving away. Deanna didn't know it then, but that brief moment, the sight of Debbie walking through her front door, would be the last time she ever saw her alive. The next morning, Arnold Ellis, a man who lived just one street over, noticed a Renault Alliance idling in front of his house. The engine was running, the keys were still in the ignition, but the driver was nowhere in sight. Puzzled and uneasy, Ellis called the police. Officers quickly determined that the car belonged to Debbie Davis. They knocked on her apartment door, no answer. An elderly neighbor, concerned and holding a spare key, let them inside. What they found was every investigator's nightmare. Debbie was lying face down on her bed. She was topless, wearing only cut-off jean shorts. Her right arm was tied behind her back with thick bootlaces. Her left arm was pinned beneath her. Around her neck was a black sock, twisted tight, used to strangle her. She had been assaulted and murdered. Investigators pieced together the killer's entry. He had stolen a rocking chair from a nearby porch, propped it beneath Debbie's kitchen window, and climbed inside. On her nightstand sat a mystery novel she had been reading, Presumed Innocent, a chilling coincidence, as it told the story of a woman who was bound and killed. Detective Ray Williams summed up the crime scene with unease. Very seldom does a crook do that kind of damage and spend that much time with his victim and not leave a bunch of clues. But he left nothing. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses, nothing stolen. Debbie's quiet, simple life offered no suspects. She wasn't dating anyone, hadn't seen her ex-husband in years, and had no ties to drugs or nightlife. Richmond police were stumped, but within just 2 weeks, terror would strike again. Another life taken. On October 3rd, 1987, Susan Elizabeth Hellam a bright and driven neurosurgery resident at the Medical College of Virginia, became the killer's next victim. Susan, originally from Charleston, South Carolina, had recently married Marcel Slag. The couple lived in a serene home in the Woodland Heights neighborhood, less than a mile from Debbie Davis's apartment. That night, Marcel returned home around 1:45 a.m. As he entered, he heard movement upstairs. Assuming Susan was still awake from her late shift, he quietly showered before slipping into their dark bedroom. As his eyes adjusted, horror gripped him. Susan's partially nude body was crumpled halfway out of their closet. Her hands were bound behind her back with an extension cord and a necktie. A red leather belt was cinched around her neck. She had been strangled and assaulted. A window stood wide open. On the balcony outside, investigators found an open jar of Vaseline, traced back to a store near Cloverleaf Mall, the same mall where Debbie Davis worked. Two women, bound and strangled, their homes violated by a predator who left behind nothing but fear, and this was only the beginning. A community in panic. By November, the Richmond area was living in fear. Then came the third victim, a 15-year-old Diane Cho. Diane, who had immigrated from Korea in 1984, was known as a responsible, bright teenager who helped her parents navigate life in the U.S. But for weeks, she'd been telling friends about a recurring nightmare, a faceless man stalking her. She even claimed to have seen him in real life, lurking around Cloverleaf Mall. On the night of November 21st, 1987, Diane stayed up late typing an English paper. By the next afternoon, her parents found her lifeless body. She had been bound with rope, strangled, and assaulted. The killer had, once again, slipped in through her bedroom window. 3 women, different ages, different lives. But the method was identical, a killer who wouldn't stop. The murders didn't end there. On November 27th, Sue Tucker, a 44-year-old magazine editor in Arlington County, was found bound, strangled, and left in a gruesome state in her own bedroom. Investigators connected her murder to an eerily similar 1984 case, where Carolyn Hamm, a 32-year-old attorney, had been killed in the same manner. A man named David Vasquez had been serving time for that earlier crime. But if he was in prison, who was continuing the killings? As detectives compared notes, patterns emerged. The same sadistic killer who terrorized Arlington in the early 80s had resurfaced in Richmond. They now had a serial killer on their hands, someone intelligent, meticulous, and utterly remorseless. Detectives began piecing together timelines and discovered a promising lead. Timothy Spencer. A career burglar, Spencer had been incarcerated during the lull in killings between 1984 and 1987. Paroled to a halfway house in Richmond just before Debbie Davis's murder, his records showed he signed himself out on every night a killing occurred, even securing a furlough to Arlington on the day of Sue Tucker's murder. Under surveillance, Spencer spent hours loitering around Cloverleaf Mall, the same haunting connection to Debbie, Susan, and Diane. On January 20th, 1988, detectives arrested Spencer. Lacking eyewitnesses or fingerprints, they turned to a revolutionary forensic tool, DNA fingerprinting. At the time, it had never secured a conviction in the United States. Weeks later, the results came back, an exact match to the crime scene evidence. Timothy Spencer, now known as the Southside Strangler, was convicted in July 1988. His crimes marked the first U.S. conviction based entirely on DNA evidence. Justice, at last. Spencer received multiple death sentences. Meanwhile, David Vasquez, the man wrongfully convicted of Carolyn Hamm's murder, was exonerated, becoming the first American freed by DNA testing. On April 27, 1994, Timothy Wilson Spencer was executed by electric chair at Greensville Correctional Center, ending the reign of terror that had claimed so many lives. For the victims' families, the verdict brought closure, but the memory of Richmond's season of fear still lingers, a chilling reminder of a predator who prowled the night, striking without warning and leaving nothing behind but silence. Case file number 2. Catherine Louise Martin was born on October 25, 1959. Her family and friends referred to her as Kathy. Kathy met Mike Odom in high school when they were 16 years old. They dated for a while and then decided to marry before they could get married. Mike was arrested for selling heroin. He sold it to an undercover officer. He was sentenced to 6 years for this crime, but only served 2. Kathy told her family that she was set on marrying him when he got released. 2 years later, when he was freed, they did end up marrying Kathy, and Mike had 2 children together, Tasha and Sean. They lived in Harris County, Texas. Kathy's father, Frankie Martin, decided to give Mike a job at his sign business. Kathy did everything to ensure the marriage worked. She was also described as a loving mother who would have done anything for her kids. On the night of March 3, 1987, Mike tried to contact Kathy. He was out of town working. Kathy was supposed to be home with the children, so it was alarming to him. When she did not answer the phone, Mike called their next-door neighbor and asked him to check up on Kathy and their children. The neighbor knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He looked in through the windows and saw that the television was still on. Instead of calling police, the neighbor drove into town, found a policeman, and they both drove back to the Odom's house. The officer found the front door to be unlocked. He entered the house, and inside of the living room sofa was 4-year-old Tasha. She had been beaten badly and unconscious, but was fortunately still alive. 2-month-old Sean was found unharmed in his bedroom in Kathy and Mike's bedroom. The officer found Kathy's battered, naked body. She was covered in blood. Kathy had been severely beaten and stabbed more than 16 times. She had also been strangled, assaulted, and her wrists were bound with the cord to a lamp. Officers feared that the person responsible for this would come back and finish the job. They started with Tasha. Both Tasha and Sean were taken to the hospital. It was ordered that they could not be left alone. Kathy's father, Frankie, arrived at the crime scene. He was told to go to the hospital to be with his grandchildren. While at the hospital, Frankie learned about what happened to his daughter on a TV screen. Meanwhile, back at the house, Mike finally arrived. Policemen paid special attention to his appearance. One of the officers noted that Mike had several red stains on his shirt. It looked like blood. A search of the Odom's house revealed blood in the bathroom. The perpetrator, possibly Mike, had attempted to clean up before leaving. Police found no sign of a break-in. All doors were locked except for the front door. This indicated that Kathy knew the person that took her life. The fact that she was stabbed so many times also told investigators it was a personal crime. Kathy's clothes told police something about what happened. They were found neatly folded on the floor. Investigators theorized that the perpetrator attacked Tasha in order to get whatever he wanted from Kathy. Back at the hospital, Tasha was in critical condition. She was in a coma and was reliant on IVs. While doctors worked on saving her life, investigators focused on her father, Mike Odom. He appeared emotional and distraught, but investigators had their doubts about him. From the start, investigators discovered that Mike did not come straight home from work like he said he would. He had gone out with friends of his to investigators. It was something they had seen before. An individual arranging a slaying, being at a different location, then calling someone else to go check in on the victim. Mike's clothing was taken to the forensic lab for testing. That was not all. Investigators also found strange stains on the car floor of the neighbor, Tim Robinson. It was clear to investigators Tim and Mike conducted a plan to take Kathy's life. Perhaps Mike was using again and was seeking insurance money. But there was soon a twist in the case. The medical examiner estimated that Kathy's life was taken around 6 hours before her body was found. That would be about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Both Mike and Tim claimed to be at work at the time. While investigators checked their alibis, a witness came forward. That witness is 4-year-old Tasha. She emerged from her coma and told investigators that she remembers a man entering the house. Tasha said the man had yellow hair. Neither Mike Odom nor Tim Robinson had blonde hair. Unfortunately, the man's hair color was all Tasha could remember. When the forensic tests came back, it showed that the stains in Tim's car were motor oil. The stains on Mike's shirt was paint. Furthermore, co-workers provided solid alibis for both Mike and Tim. Each of them also passed polygraph tests. The two of them were then ruled out, and investigators could move on to the next person. That next person was not very hard to find. Kathy had a sister, Shelley Martin. She was married to Greg Mark Wart. They met thanks to Mike. Greg and Mike had been close since they were both in the drug scene like Kathy. Shelley was also 16 when she met the man she would marry. Greg was 25 years old at the time, which should have been a red flag already. Greg and Shelley married in 1983. Soon after, both Shelley and Kathy got addicted, just like Greg and Mike. Greg and Shelley were known to steal from her parents for money. Greg had been raised by a wealthy aunt and uncle, and the aunt repaid the Martins the money, and everyone agreed not to file charges. While Mike and Kathy had turned their lives around, Greg and Shelley did not. They were in and out of jail frequently, shortly before Kathy's life was taken. She told a friend that Greg and Shelley had been over recently, and that while Shelley was in the other room with the baby, Greg had made advances towards her, which she of course rejected. When questioned, Greg would claim that on the night of the crime, at the times in which he was not with his wife, he was with a man named Hampton Robinson, in an unimportant but interesting note. Robinson was a friend of Charles Harrelson. Harrelson was the father of actor Woody Harrelson, and in 1982 was convicted of slaying a judge. In fact, Robinson had testified against Harrelson at his trial. There was ample evidence that Greg had been in the house. They found his fingerprints and his hair throughout the crime scene. There was only one problem as a family member who had been in the house numerous times. This did not prove a thing. Kathy's parents told investigators that they believed Greg was responsible. Frankie said that 2 days after Kathy's slaying, he received a phone call in the middle of the night from the hospital where Tasha was being treated, telling him that Shelley and Greg had come to visit. Frankie told them to not allow admittance first, because he was suspicious of Greg, but also the fact that no one had a reason to be there at 3 in the morning. Especially them. Tasha's grandmother, Charlene Martin, who was at the hospital, recalled what happened when Tasha saw Greg. She became very scared, and he was ordered to leave. Investigators asked Tasha if it was her uncle Greg that she saw inside their house with Kathy on the day of the attack. Unfortunately, she could not remember. Investigators tried many techniques, but due to her head injury, she could not remember a thing. While Greg denied any involvement when talking to investigators, he was surprisingly open about his attraction to Kathy, particularly to one part of her body. Greg had a thing for Kathy's stomach. This fixation was so obvious that Kathy had even mentioned it to her friends. Interestingly enough, Kathy was mainly stabbed in the stomach. At one point during the interview, Greg asked to leave to put more money in a parking lot meter. He never came back. He also refused a polygraph. Investigators decided to look into his alibi. Shelley said that Greg drove her to school at 10:30 a.m. on the date of the crime and picked her up again at 2:30 p.m. This 4-hour window was more than enough time for Greg to commit the crime. And as you'll remember, the medical examiner determined that her life was taken around 1 p.m. that day. Even though Kathy was assaulted, this crime occurred years before DNA was widely used in cold case investigations. At the time, they were using serology. Basically, they were doing blood group typing. It was very difficult to do, and you need a very large sample. You'd still just get a blood type, which was not very conclusive. The blood type from the evidence collected from Kathy's body was consistent with Greg Mart's blood type. He was type O as well as the perpetrator. About 50% of the population has the same blood type, so it did not tell investigators much without more evidence. The case sadly went cold for some time. For Frankie, it was especially difficult believing that the man who took his daughter's life was married to his other daughter. In 1998, a cold case team was formed, and one of the first cases they looked at was that of Kathy Odom's. By then, DNA testing was dependable enough to generate a DNA profile from the biological evidence. In Kathy's case, tests showed that Greg was part of the 2% of the general population who could have been the perpetrator. Still not conclusive, but a lot better than 50%. Greg quickly came up with an explanation to investigators. He claimed that he and Kathy were having a consensual affair. Greg said that he was with her on the morning. Her life was taken. He insisted that she was alive when he left. Greg was not arrested at the time because even though investigators did not believe him, they were concerned that they did not have enough for a conviction. They had to prove that he was present when the crime was committed. Investigators reached out to Catherine Long, who worked for Awkward Cellmark, a private forensic lab in Dallas, Texas. Catherine came up with an unusual strategy to try and solve Kathy's crime. She and her colleagues were strangling each other. Let me explain. They wanted to determine if a perpetrator would deposit skin cells in the act of choking a victim. They realized that there was indeed a significant transfer of skin cells from the perpetrator to the victim. Investigators needed to find something in Kathy's evidence file that would have contained the perpetrator's skin cells. They decided to do tests on the electrical cord that was used to bind Kathy's sands. In an incredible piece of luck, the cord had been stored in a paper bag and not a plastic bag. The paper bag provides breathability so that there is not any moisture on the item inside, and it's going to stay dry. That will therefore prolong the DNA life. It will actually preserve the DNA longer than if we're in a plastic bag. The cord was covered in blood. Investigators swapped the cord to obtain all the evidence they could. Testing revealed 2 genetic profiles, that of Kath Odom and that of Greg Mark Wads. The only way Mark Wads' DNA could be on the cord was if, in fact, he was the perpetrator. Finally, on December 18, 2002, Greg was arrested and charged with taking Kathy's life. While in prison, Greg confessed to a fellow inmate. He said that he was high on heroin when he drove to Kathy's house that day. Once inside, he made advances that she rejected to force her to comply. He struck Tasha repeatedly in the head. He then threatened to take Sean's life as well. In order to save her children's lives, she had to comply with a knife from the kitchen. Greg then cut the electrical cord from the lamp and tied Kathy's hands. After he assaulted her, he took her life. Greg then cleaned up in the bathroom and changed into Mike Odom's clothing. Little did he know that advances in DNA technology would be used to identify him as the perpetrator. 15 years later, 6 months after his arrest, Greg's wealthy aunt passed away, leaving him hundreds of thousands of dollars and part ownership of her home. The Martins decided to file a suit against him, and it tied up the estate, which prevented him from using those funds towards his defense. In 2004, Greg Marwad pled guilty, and he was convicted of all the charges against him. In July of the same year, he was sentenced to 45 years in prison. He passed away of liver disease after serving 4 years of his sentence. In 2008, he was 56 years old. Sergeant Roger Wadsworth was quoted as saying, "Couldn't happen to a nicer guy." Shelley and her parents lost contact after the crime. She took Mark Wood's side while they believed he was responsible. It was said that for a long time, Shelley continued to support Mark and believed in his innocence. A few years after the crime, the Martins moved to Oklahoma. A few years after that, it seemed that Shelley made up with her parents, and she too moved to Oklahoma to be near her parents, Kathy's. Father Frankie said, "It does not bring back Kathy. I will always remember her, the house she put together, and the things we did. It is always tough to lose a child." Case file number 3. Raina Lynn Rezin was born on May 6, 1976, in LaPorte, Indiana. She lived with her parents, Ben and Karen Rezin. She had an older sister, Lori, and a younger sister, Wendy. In 1993, 16-year-old, Raina was described as a good student and aspired to a career as a veterinarian because of her deep compassion for animals. Other than being a sophomore at LaPorte High School, Raina worked 3 jobs as well. She worked at the animal hospital, where she walked dogs and cleaned kettles. On Friday, March 26, 1993, Raina was tasked with closing the animal hospital after a short shift from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Raina and her ex-boyfriend, Matt Ayler, were planning to spend the evening together, and she could not wait to see him again. They had recently broken up, and the date was a step towards possibly getting back together like Raina. Matt came from a good, upstanding family and was regarded as a decent young man. In short, he was the kind of guy any parent would be happy to have their daughter date. Matt arrived at the animal hospital at 6 p.m. to pick up Raina. He got out of his car after waiting a while and headed to the front door, where he found that all of the lights were off and the door was closed. Matt saw that Raina's car was not in the parking lot, so he drove to her home to see if she was there. Raina's father, Ben, told Matt that she had not returned home from work. They hadn't seen her since she left home to go to the animal hospital for her shift. Her family assumed she was out on the date with Matt, but now they were worried. It was very unlike Raina to not tell her family where exactly she was. Raina's parents, her younger sister, Wendy, and Matt all waited in the house for Raina to come home when Raina had still not shown up by 10:30 p.m. Her family went to the police station to report her as missing. The police could only register a missing persons report. After waiting for 24 hours, Ben gave them a photo of Raina and asked them to be on the lookout. Either way, since it was so unlike Raina. Her family then started to look for her. They tried to get in touch with her acquaintances, but no one knew where she could be. They also handed out missing persons flyers in the area, hoping someone would come forward with valuable information. When the police got involved, they made a public appeal for any information that led to Raina's whereabouts. Immediately, a handful of eyewitnesses came forward saying that just before 6 p.m., they saw a sedan parked outside the animal hospital where Raina worked. Multiple eyewitnesses said they saw 2 men in the sedan along with Raina. It appeared that Raina was arguing with the men. The witnesses ignored it at first, since they assumed it was just a couple having an argument. Matt Ayler was questioned by investigators. He stuck to his story about waiting for Raina and discovering that she was not at the animal hospital. The police learned that Matt had wanted to take a break from the relationship. They had taken a break, but recently gotten back together. Their date that night was supposed to be really special, and they were both looking forward to it. Matt knew something serious had to have happened for Raina to not show up. Raina's parents assured the authorities that Matt was a good and trustworthy young man. They also pointed out that his car was not the one witnesses saw clearing him of any wrongdoing. Raina's car was discovered the night after she disappeared, not far from the animal hospital. The car's hood was raised and gave the impression that she may have had car trouble. Officers were able to get her car started easily with her keys that were still in the ignition. When they arrived, it appeared as if the car breakdown was staged. Furthermore, officers saw that Raina's handbag was still in her car, which contained her purse and credit cards. All of her money was also still in the car, which meant this was definitely not a robbery. A man's ring was found in Raina's glove compartment. It was shown to Matt Ehler. Matt said that it was not his ring. He identified the man's ring as belonging to Jason Tibbs. Jason was Raina's ex-boyfriend. They dated back in the 7th grade and broke up after being together for around 8 months. He had a criminal history and had dropped out of school. Police decided to question 16-year-old Jason Tibbs. He admitted that the ring in question was really his and inquired as to where it had been found. When officers informed him it had been discovered in Raina's car, he claimed that they were still friends and he had done some work on the car and must have forgotten his ring in the glove compartment. Jason said that he had taken off his ring to protect it from grime and grease while working on the car. Locals vouched for Jason and said that he was an excellent mechanic. It seemed plausible that Raina had contacted him if she was having car trouble. Investigators asked him where he was on the night that she disappeared. Jason claimed that he had been playing a game of fox hunting. Fox hunting is a game of hide and seek, but played in cars. Friends share their locations over wireless radios and try to hunt each other down. His friends confirmed they'd been playing fox hunting that evening, but no one had actually seen Jason. Raina's father confirmed that Raina and Jason were friends, so the rings seemed to be a dead end. Raina's case started to go cold until the police made a discovery. Matt's Letterman jacket was found by a LaPorte sheriff's deputy. Raina had last been seen with the jacket. Matt gave it to Raina to wear. It signified that the two of them were together. The jacket was found about 6 or 7 miles away from where her car was found. The jacket had been placed there after the police's initial search. Unfortunately, the jacket yielded no further clues or evidence on April 26, 1993, a month after Raina was last seen. A fisherman and his teenage daughter were at a pond off Range Road north of LaPorte, Indiana. The daughter was taking a stroll when she saw a pair of human legs in the water. She yelled for her father to come take a look. He went closer and determined that it was a female body in the water. 2 logs were placed on top of her body. When police arrived at the scene, they noted that the unknown woman wore the same clothes that Raina was last seen wearing before she disappeared. Despite the body's advanced state of decomposition, it was determined that she was Raina Ryson. This was no longer a missing persons case. No obvious wounds or signs of significant trauma were found on her body. Later during the autopsy, it was concluded that Raina had been strangled with the discovery investigators.
Went back to Jason Tibbs to see if he knew anything. He told them about Ray McCarty. Ray was married to Raina's older sister, Lori Ryson. Ray had assaulted and impregnated Raina when she was 11 and had been imprisoned for the crime. His probation ended only 2 months before Raina went missing. You'd think Lori Ryson would have divorced Ray for what he did. But no, they were still married.
He clearly had a motive and was dangerous, with a past criminal record targeted against Raina. Investigators visited Ray and Lori's house. The couple told investigators that neither of them saw Raina on the day she disappeared. Ray stated that he was busy shooting pigeons on a friend's farm that night. The detectives called a friend, and he confirmed that Ray was indeed with him that night. Something didn't feel right to investigators. so they went to talk with Ray again. Ray talked to them alone and told them that he had seen Raina on the night she vanished. He told them that he was house hunting on March 26, 1993. At about 5:40 p.m., he was gazing out the window of a house. When he saw the animal hospital, he claimed he had just briefly seen Raina at the parking lot of the animal hospital and asked if she knew where Lori was. He then left and picked up a female hitchhiker that night. Ray claimed the hitchhiker was the reason why he initially did not want to admit to having seen her. She did not fully trust him after what he did to her sister. Ray McCarty became the main suspect at this point, but there was no physical evidence connecting him to the crime, and the case went cold. Unfortunately, the case remained cold for almost 18 months. It was then that Indiana State Police pulled over a van driven by Larry Hall. Hall would travel across the Midwest for Civil War and the Independence War reenact. His van resembled one used in an attempted kidnapping. The police examined the van and discovered several items related to Raina's case. In his van, he had newspaper clippings of Raina and a prescription bottle with the name R. Ricin on it. Larry claimed he was the one that abducted Slayed Raina. He was then arrested. Detectives investigated his movements on the night of her disappearance and discovered that he was in Kentucky, and the prescription bottle was a fake. Hall had falsely confessed to abducting and slaying around 50 other women. He seemed like the type of person who would insert himself into any investigation and confess. Larry Hall was subsequently ruled out as a suspect in Raina's case. He was not completely innocent, though he was found guilty of taking 15-year-old Jessica Roach's life. I'll go over the case briefly at the end of the video for those interested. As for Raina's case, it remained cold until 1998. Investigators did not know what else they could do and looked at their initial suspects. Again, Matt Sir, Jason Tibbs, and Ray McCarty. Matt's alibi was solid, and investigators never really considered him a serious suspect. Jason's story of fox hunting wasn't that solid, because no one actually saw him, but it seemed he was on good terms with Raina. Ray, on the other hand, lied about his alibi at first, and he was most definitely a horrible person. So investigators decided to focus on him. They got a warrant to search Ray's property. Inside his house, investigators found 2 handguns and a stun gun. They also discovered blood in his car's trunk, but were unable to determine its source. Ray McCarty was arrested in May 1998. He waited in jail for 15 months while the police continued to build their case against him. While Ray was in jail, a new prosecutor had been assigned. He was a hunter, and it was concluded that the blood belonged to a deer. The prosecutor felt that there was not enough evidence linking him to the crime, and they were forced to let him go again. He was released after a year in jail for the next 9 years. The case would once again be classified as a cold case, unfortunately. Then, in 2008, police got a lead that would blow this case wide open. They received a letter from an inmate serving a 44-year sentence. His name is Ricky Hammonds. He requested to talk with investigators. Ricky was in prison because he took his roommate's life. Ricky said he decided to come forward after thinking about his niece. He said he would want someone to come forward if anything had happened to her. This is everything he had to say. Back in 1993, when he was 14 years old, he was in the roof of a barn next to his parents' house smoking marijuana. He heard a car drive in the barn. Ricky saw his sister's boyfriend, Eric Feldman, and Jason Tibbs. They opened the trunk of his sister's sedan, and Ricky then saw a body covered by a blanket. Ricky could still make out the upper half of the victim. It was a female wearing a leather man jacket. He did not know it was Raina, but a couple of days later, when Raina's face appeared in the media, He realized who it was. Ricky said that he was scared to come forward back in 1993 because he was worried he would get into trouble for smoking marijuana. The police tracked Eric Fieldman down in South Carolina. He was visibly nervous. He did not want to speak to them and refused all interviews. Investigators then told him he will face no consequences if he can tell them exactly what happened with Raina. He accepted the deal and told them everything. Eric said that he and Jason were cruising in his girlfriend's sedan when they drove past the animal hospital on March 26, 1993. Jason wanted to get Raina to leave Matt and take him back. When she exited the animal hospital, he called her over to the car. She clearly did not want to talk to him. Before she could scream, he pushed her into the car and told Eric to drive away quickly. A couple minutes later, Eric stopped the car and Raina tried to run away. Jason followed her and said, "If I can't have you, no one can." He then strangled her until she stopped breathing. Jason and Eric loaded Raina's body in the trunk and drove to the barn. That is where Ricky saw them. After much deliberation, Eric and Jason then decided to place Raina's body in the pond and weigh her down with logs. Eric drove Jason back to the clinic to pick up Raina's car. Jason abandoned the car. He also discarded Matt's jacket. In August 2013, 38-year-old Jason Tibbs was arrested and charged with taking Raina Rezin's life. 20 long years had passed since the life of Raina was stolen. 2 decades of unanswered questions, endless appeals, and a family left to live with the unbearable void of her absence. The trial for her killer finally began in late 2013, stirring up painful memories that her loved ones had tried so hard to keep buried. The defense team fought fiercely, claiming that Ricky, the key witness, was unreliable. He had been just a high school student when the events unfolded and had waited 15 years before summoning the courage to come forward with the truth. To ensure that every word Eric Freeman spoke during his testimony was the unvarnished truth, prosecutors granted him immunity from prosecution. The courtroom was a battlefield of words, evidence, and conflicting narratives, dragging on months of lengthy trial that lasted until December 2014. Jason Tibbs was found guilty. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison. For Raina's family, it was bittersweet justice. After 20 years of relentless waiting, countless sleepless nights, and the never-ending weight of grief, they finally had some closure. They wept openly, holding one another and embracing the prosecutor who had fought so hard for them. But as they left the courthouse, one painful truth remained. No amount of justice could ever bring back the vibrant young girl they had lost to a senseless crime of passion. Yet Jason Tibbs has never wavered in his stance. From behind prison walls, he maintains his innocence, repeatedly insisting that another man, Ray McCarty, was the true perpetrator. His legal team fought tirelessly, appealing to the Indiana Supreme Court after the state appellate court denied their motion on September 8, 2016. Even as recently as 2018, the Indiana Court of Appeals turned down his request for a new trial. His lawyers still publicly declare, "We will not stop until Jason Tibbs is exonerated." Raina was only 16, bright, full of dreams, and finally happy again after reconciling with her boyfriend, Matt. But she was surrounded by people who betrayed her trust, people who ultimately failed to protect her. A parallel tragedy. The case of Jessica Roach. While Raina's story came to a heartbreaking close, another case from decades earlier paints a chillingly similar picture of young innocence destroyed. Jessica Roach was just 15 years old in 1993, living with her family in the small town of Georgetown, Illinois. She was a spirited teenager with a boundless curiosity and a big dream to one day soar through the skies as a pilot. On September 20th, 1993, Jessica proudly took her brand new bicycle out for a ride. Hours later, the bike was found abandoned on the side of the road, but Jessica was nowhere to be found. Her sister was the first to stumble upon the eerie sight, and panic quickly gripped the family. Their father called the police, launching a frantic search that stretched across counties. 6 agonizing weeks later, the family's worst fears were confirmed. A farmer in Perrysville, Indiana, just across the state line, made a horrific discovery while operating his combine: Jessica's remains, left to the elements for weeks. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, investigators struggled to piece together when, where, or how she had died. Nearly a year later, authorities caught a break. Larry Hall, a man with a disturbing history, was apprehended after trailing 2 young girls who managed to report him and provide his license plate number. When shown a photograph of Jessica, Hall visibly flinched and shielded his face, a fleeting, involuntary gesture that spoke volumes.
Under relentless questioning, Hall eventually confessed. He recounted tying Jessica up, stripping away her clothing, assaulting her, and strangling her with his belt against a tree. Chillingly, he also alluded to other victims, young girls whose names he could no longer recall, as if their lives were mere blurs in his twisted memory.
Though investigators determined that many of his other confessions were fabricated, they were certain about one thing. Larry Hall had murdered Jessica Roach. Hall was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and is currently housed at a medium-security facility in North Carolina. Jessica's family, though shattered, has fought to keep her memory alive. They've held memorial events, and in 2015, established a scholarship in her honor, a lasting tribute to the bright future that was so cruelly taken away. That concludes today's video. I truly hope this gave you valuable insight into some of the most overlooked cases throughout the years. If you found this helpful, please consider liking, subscribing, and turning on notifications to stay updated. If you're not sure what to comment, just drop a 555. It lets me know you watched till the end. Thanks again for your time and support. There's more on the way, so stay tuned.